build that engine first, strengthen your body, but really let your consistency beat your intensity. Many of you listening here can accomplish so much more than you think. Like, your glass ceiling is so much higher if you just be patient, think longer term, keep showing up with consistency and joy and patience, really. When you do that, it becomes so much easier, so much more in flow. Your lactate levels drop, your heart rate is going to drop, and your running will become easier.
If there's one thing you wish you knew when you started running that would have prevented injuries and accelerated your process, what would that be?
When I started running, it was very much focused on the no pain, no gain. That was really pushing harder, and there was a lot of injuries, there was a lot of burnout, there was overtraining, there was the part of you come back from a run, you feel like you would have to lay on the couch because you just zapped out of energy. I truly have overdone it to a point where I realized maybe what I just didn't serve me very well. And I've, like many other athletes, been at that cusp of injury. I've been at that part where you do a workout that's so hard that for 3 days after you don't feel like working out, or I've pushed it to a point that I've done heat training and overdid it and started feeling very ill after. And so I think sometimes you have to go through some of these learning experiences of what works and what doesn't, because it does humble you.
Floris Gierman is the host and founder of the Extra Milest Show, one of the most respected long-form podcasts in the running space, where he spent years having thoughtful, in-depth conversations with some of the world's best runners, coaches, researchers, and everyday athletes like you and me. Through those conversations and through his own journey as a runner, he's developed a very grounded, experience-driven perspective on what actually helps runners improve over the long term.
I've had dozens of people come up to me and tell me, Floris, I have been suicidal, and if it wasn't for your podcast, I don't know if I would have still been here. And that hit me really, really hard. That didn't happen once or twice. That literally happened dozens of times. This is why I felt so like I felt the need. I was put on this earth to put this message out there of like, be kind to self, be gentle. You don't need to beat yourself up in your workouts. There's other ways, and you'll be surprised how much further it can actually get you once you stop forcing it and you're actually taking that side. There's so many athletes who are in their 40s, 50s, 60s who think their best running years are behind them. And all of a sudden they come across this gentle training approach where they're like, I can run again the next day, and my injuries, my niggles went away, and my race times are improving from 5K all the way to the marathon and beyond, and I discovered a joy of running I didn't even know existed.
He's also the author of Running Breakthroughs, where he distills many of those lessons into a clear, practical framework around becoming a stronger, healthier, and happier runner.
The book is a summary of 12 years of lessons from the podcast, really. So it's all these gold nuggets that I've taken away from these conversations, and I think sometimes you listen to a 1 hour podcast and there's one key takeaway or two key takeaways. So for me, I collected 30 notebooks full of those kind of nuggets. So I want to zoom out on that and provide basic fundamentals. There's some basic training schedules. If you have X amount of time available to train, this is how I would go about it.
What advice would you give someone who wants to become a better runner in 2026, regardless of their starting point?
I would say simplify.
In today's conversation, I wanted to turn the tables a bit. Floris is usually the one asking the questions, but here we explore his evolution as a runner, how his thinking has changed as he moves through his 40s, and after speaking to so many experts, what he truly believes are the smartest ways to become a better runner going forward. So, if you've ever thought, how can I be a better runner in 2026? Then, this conversation is very much for you. I hope you enjoy my chat with Floris Gierman. Floris, so you're the host and founder of the Extra Milest podcast. You've interviewed hundreds of experts and athletes, and you've now distilled your thinking into a book. But if someone just clicked on this video and are discovering you for the first time today, how would you describe what you actually do in the running space across all the different initiatives that you're involved in? And I know you're involved in a lot.
Yeah, I'm wearing a few hats. I would really say I'm at the intersection of coaching, of storytelling, and of product. So I have a running coaching program. It's called the Personal Best Running Coaching Program, where I've coached thousands of athletes globally. I also have the Extra Milest podcast, where I've interviewed a variety of different world-class athletes. coaches and experts, and also recreational runners. And then I have a running clothing company. It's called Path Projects, where we create men's running apparel for road running and for trail running. And so then the book Running Breakthroughs is kind of bringing it all together, and those are really the learnings from the last 12 years, the different lessons that I've learned from the podcast interviews, from my own coaching, and from some of my own running adventures as well.
Are you involved in chorus in any way? Because I hear you talking about being in the chorus office sometimes.
Funny enough, I am actually currently in the chorus office.
There we go.
So I don't work for them in any sort of way. Lewis Wu, the founder of Chorus, he's a good friend, and our running clothing company, Path Projects, we work all remote, so we're all over the place. Like, we have teams all around the world. And I was talking with him on a run, and I was like, yeah, I'm looking to rent some office place. And he was like, well, why don't you come work out of my spa? And so that's where it started. So I have a key to the place, and yeah, it's nice. It all works out well, and I think they're letting me work out of here, and like, I share with them what's working on the YouTube front, what I'm learning, helping from time to time with like what is working for Path Projects and across the board there, and then they're helping with sharing. It's really like knowledge sharing. And I've also had the opportunity to have several of their athletes as guests on my podcast as well.
I like chorus. I've got a chorus on, right?
Ah, there you go. Yeah. Absolutely, same here.
And you said Path Projects is only for men.
I mean, like, we started as 4 co-founders, really as a men's running apparel brand. We had years of experience in that field. That being said, many of our items are being worn by women as well. So in particular, we, for example, have a Pyrenees long sleeve hooded shirt. It got Runners World Gear of the Year award, and that one works very well for men and for women. It's just the sizing is in men's sizes, so women would just have to downsize on it.
Let's pivot a bit and talk about Floris the runner for a second.
Let's go.
All right. You've been running for decades now. How has your relationship with running changed since you crossed into your 40s? Be it mentally, emotionally, or physically?
When I started running, it was very much focused on the no pain, no gain. That was really pushing harder, and there was a lot of injuries, there was a lot of burnout, there was overtraining, there was a part of you come back from a run and you feel like you would have to lay on the couch because you just zapped out of energy. It was in my 30s that I discovered the joy of low intensity running, where it really became much more focused on being kind to self, being gentle, and from there on training at an intensity that was a bit more manageable to develop your aerobic system more. And so that meant really going out and running at a conversational pace for most of the runs. As I progressed more in my training, some of the aerobic pace became quite a bit faster, even to a point that running all of your runs at the high end of your zone 2 at that point would be too much. And so even there, dialing back and doing some higher intensity sessions where you do push it to the high end of zone 4, but then also doing lower intensity sessions where you even run some of those in zone 1. I will say at the beginning I was very much into racing, and I completed all world major marathons, did like probably 50 marathons, like 50 milers, 100 miles. After a while I started becoming less focused on the actual racing and much more on the enjoyment. I stopped caring much about run finish times. It's not that I was like it didn't matter. I still wanted to, for example, complete all world major marathons under 3 hours. That was one of the things that I want to do. However, like, for me to run some of the personal best times really meant I would have to train 12 hours a week consistent, or try to get up to 80 miles a week, and I just didn't have the priority for that anymore. Mm-hmm. With having some of my own, like having a podcast, having a running clothing company, having multiple startups, and having 2 young kids, it just became a priority game, right? Where, what do I want to get out of running? It wasn't the finish times that mattered that much anymore. It became about recharging myself for daily life. And so it became almost like a de-stressor to go out on runs versus making it so much of a goal of getting to this race, to this finish time.
Do you think that as we age as runners, do you think we need more discipline or more restraint?
I think quite a few people have the discipline. I think as you age as well, the restraint comes to play as well, meaning I think people still have to hold back, not only in training but even in racing, meaning the whole intensity discipline is a very, very big one. And I see a lot of athletes even going through training cycles where they do it quite well. Like, let's say they have a training approach of like the majority of the runs is going to be at a low intensity, and then they're adding in some of the higher intensity after that as well. Well, then come race day, if you've just trained for 3 months, 4 months, 5 months, and you put all that time and effort into training, and then you go into race day and you don't really have a race day strategy that's well thought out, that's where I think training discipline also becomes racing discipline. Meaning, have some idea of what pace am I going to be running, have some idea of this is my nutritional strategy for race day. And too many times I see athletes actually skip that part where they're just not that focused on race day strategy, but I do think that kind of holds them back, really.
And you said earlier that, you know, your training has kind of evolved a bit over the years. Is there something that you've stopped doing now that you used to do when you're younger, apart from pushing it to the limit all the time, like a specific kind of workout? And is there something that you started doing now in your training that you thought was too soft or unnecessary when you were younger?
I was doing a lot more structured workouts, where it would be, now I'm going to a track and do 6 times 3 minutes, 8 times 3 minutes, and then 1 minute off. And as much as I still think structure is important, I found the day-to-day flexibility to be much more important, and I enjoyed fartlek, so speed play, much more. That means some days I feel really strong and I would go out and do some hard fartleks because the body responds well to it. I enjoy fartleks on the trails, on the hills, being able to push it. However, other days I really feel that if a workout would be on the schedule of 6 times 3 minutes, 1 minute off, it would be way too much for me, even if the intensity wouldn't be that high. And so I think the speed play and the flexibility for me at this stage of life works out really well. And I think this really goes back to how full is your stress bucket in daily life. If your bucket, if you don't have that much going on in daily life, you can handle a lot of training load. Really, when I've spoken to several different athletes, that's what shows up. Like the Eliud Kipchoge's of the world, they live a fairly simple life and they try not to do too much. And why is that? Just so their bodies can handle plenty of training load and they can recover well from it. And then even when I spoke to Taylor Knipp, like triathlon world champion, that was very similar. Like, try not to stress so much throughout the day, live a fairly simple life. And you literally notice that your training absorption starts improving, your lactate level starts dropping. And I think that all goes hand in hand, and that's easier said than done. So on my podcast, I've interviewed dozens of recreational runners too. And when I asked my audience, what do you enjoy most? What type of conversation? That often came up. And why is that? Because it's relatable. And I think the relatable part is that these are all athletes that also have jobs, that have busy lives, whether that's with families or with other projects. So you often need to do your workouts early in the morning or after work or in the weekends at certain times. And I think that day-to-day flexibility of being realistic about real life happening, meaning before I used to stick regardless of what would happen to a training schedule, and now it became much more, here's an outline of a training schedule and I'm going to do the best I can to somewhat stick to that. However, most probably it's going to be a flexibility of some days harder, some days softer, and some days I'm just going to skip a workout and sleep instead.
So you kind of go by feel?
Yeah, I would say it's feel, but it's also checking in with self in the morning. And this was one of the topics that Courtney Dauwalter, and the greatest mountain athlete, brought up on the podcast. She literally said, first thing in the morning I do is I drink a cup of coffee and I check in. I literally just check in with my systems. How is my body feeling? How is my energy? And from there on determine what that workout is going to look like for the day. I
kind of do it when I'm on the run itself. You know, sometimes I feel good when I wake up, and when I start moving, things don't the wheels don't come on.
Yeah.
And sometimes I don't feel good when I start, but the wheels come on and it's like, you know what, let's just go for it today.
Yeah, and it's the other way around sometimes too, right? Sometimes you might not feel like going for a workout, but then you just do the 10-minute rule, meaning let's get out the door, start walking for a bit, and just keep moving for 10 minutes. Typically after about 10 minutes, you're warmed up. I mean, like you're in Finland, for you it might be 15 or 20 minutes because it's colder for you. But over here in California, it's a little bit warmer. So after you're warmed up, if then you decide like, hey, I'm still not feeling it, but 9 out of 10 times you would be feeling it often.
You just mentioned that you've interviewed some of the greatest athletes of all time, like Conor Dauwalter, Eliud Kipchoge, Kylian Jornet, Sifan Hassan, just to name a few, plus so many leading industry experts, be it sleep experts, nutritionists, scientists, all that good stuff. And you've ran, is it all the world marathon majors except Sydney?
Yes, correct.
But because that's a new one, and you've lived through your own injuries and breakthroughs. So if there's one thing you wish you knew when you started running that would have prevented injuries and accelerated your process, what would that be? Quick pause here. If you're enjoying this conversation so far, I just want to give you a bit of context around what we're building with the Endurance Lab podcast. From January 2026, we'll be releasing 3 podcast episodes each month. The whole premise of this show is to bring thoughtful, evidence-based conversations around nutrition, training, performance, and recovery, with those discussions shaped through the lens of long-term health and longevity for midlife runners and endurance athletes. So, if there are specific nuances within topics that you'd like me to explore more deeply, or certain guests that you'd like me to have on the show, leave them in the comments. I genuinely read all those comments, and I'll do my best to either reach out to the right experts or shape future episodes around your questions. Because ultimately, this podcast is about helping you understand the nuances so you can make better decisions in your own training and life. Alongside experts in endurance sports, from researchers and coaches to specialists in different areas of performance, we'll also be featuring masters athletes, people who've achieved meaningful performance breakthroughs later in life, to share their stories, the mistakes they've made, how their training has evolved with age, and the practical lessons they've learned along the way. So, if this kind of conversation resonates with you, consider subscribing and setting the notification bell to all so you'll be notified whenever a new episode goes live. Alright, let's get back to the conversation. So, if there's one thing you wish you knew when you started running that would have prevented injuries and accelerated your process, what would that be?
It was going with the flow of the day-to-day change in training. I think it kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier, but realizing that more is not always better. I truly have overdone it to a point where I realized maybe what I just did didn't serve me very well. And I've, like many other athletes, been at that cusp of injury. I've been at that part where you do a workout that's so hard that for 3 days after you don't feel like working out. Or I've pushed it to a point that I've done heat training and overdid it and started feeling very ill after. And so I think sometimes you have to go through some of these learning experiences of what works and what doesn't, because it does humble you. And in particular with heat training and cold exposure, you want to be very cautious because you can do some serious damage and it can be very dangerous. But I think it is good to make some of these mistakes. I think it's good to go out on a long run and completely underestimate your nutrition, or think, let me go on a 20-mile workout and bring a pack of cookies and just get your ass handed to you, because it just... And so I think it is good. And for athletes, like, we're all going to continue making mistakes. It's about how we respond to those mistakes that matters. Make those mistakes, learn from it, and one of the ways to do that is really to journal. And you journal down, like, this was my thought process going into it. This went according to plan. This didn't go according to plan. And this is what I would do different next time.
On that point, why do you think that lesson is so difficult for runners to accept?
I think a big part of that is ego. I truly think that one of the biggest challenges with low heart rate training, with gentle, kind training, is an ego component, comparison to others. And whether that is in the digital world, whether that is you having certain feelings about posting a workout on Strava because you care what other people would think. I had a conversation before this with someone who went to a run club and he just went for a low intensity run and people were making fun of him. And it's one of these things where if you post a slow time on Strava, who cares, right? But I think there's that ego component that comes in the way sometimes over here. Once we can have a beginner's mindset and we can leave the ego at the door and we just don't care what other people think, because we see low intensity running, for example, of like a short term, yeah, you're going to slow down for a bit, but over time you'll become faster at the same heart rate. Those things do help you in the long term to be able to run consistent with joy, run the next day again, versus feeling like you can't run for several days because you pushed it way too hard. And so I think the ego would probably be one of my biggest parts. The other one would be the frustration. The frustration of like, I used to run at this pace and now I have to slow down significantly, and that is not something that I enjoy doing. So yeah.
Can we pivot to talk about Running Breakthroughs, your new book?
Absolutely, let's do it.
Based on what you do professionally and your passion for running, when you set out to write this book, you could have taken the content of this book through a multitude of different directions, all within the running space still, but you chose to write Running Breakthroughs, which to me feels like a synthesis of strength, health, and happiness in running. Why did you feel this is the book that runners need right now?
So the book is a summary of 12 years of lessons from the podcast, really. So it's all these gold nuggets that I've taken away from these conversations. And I think sometimes you listen to a 1 hour podcast and there's one key takeaway or two key takeaways. So for me, I collected 30 notebooks full of those kind of nuggets. And then on top of that, it became like thousands of pages of transcripts. For me, I just wanted it in a very digestible, easy format, put that together. So for me, this was a way of basically looking back at here's a lot of different similarities, here are a lot of key different takeaways. And what you also notice is something that applies at one stage of your life might not necessarily resonate at another stage of your life. Meaning, when I am stressed, like the chapter of mindfulness or meditation or kindness to self would resonate different than when I'm not in that state. Or, for example, if I really want to get more consistent into strength training, rereading a chapter specifically by one of the leading strength coaches is a good reminder for me of like, all right, here's how I set myself up for success to get back into consistent strength training and whatnot again. And so for me, one of the main reasons to write it was like Running Breakthrough. It really is like a lot of athletes hit a plateau at some point in their running. But I've also noticed from all of these conversations over the years that there are certain fundamentals that you can use to get through those plateaus. And very often that's the opposite of forcing it. It is the letting go of outcome, to surrendering, to have grace with self, to be patient, to have joy in your workout, to train consistent. And you will be surprised, once you do those things, the breakthroughs will start falling in the right place. Once you can start running with flow, with joy, relaxed instead of forcing it. And this is one of those things, right? Like, let's say you're at the later stages of a hard workout, or you're at the later stages of a run. And you think like, oh, this is so hard. And like, you're trying to find that way to push through that. There's two approaches you can take. One is like, you try to no pain, no gain, push through, clench your fist and run harder or try harder. What if you do the opposite? What if you tell yourself, relax more? Run with an open chest, literally open your chest. Run with an open heart, take in the energy from the crowd. Run with a relaxed body, drop the shoulders. When you do that, it becomes so much easier, so much more in flow. Your lactate levels drop, your heart rate is going to drop, and your running will become easier. But it's often the polar opposite of what we're thinking. And so for me, while writing this book, I've had dozens of people come up to me and tell me, Floris, I have been suicidal, and if it wasn't for your podcast, I don't know if I would have still been here. And that hit me really, really hard. That didn't happen once or twice. That literally happened dozens of times. And this is why I felt so appealed. Like, I felt the need. I was put on this earth to put this message out there of like, be kind to self, be gentle. You don't need to beat yourself up in your workouts. There's other ways, and you'll be surprised how much further it can actually get you once you stop forcing it and you're actually taking that side. There's so many athletes who are in their 40s, 50s, 60s who think their best running years are behind them. And all of a sudden they come across this gentle training approach where they're like, I can run again the next day, and my injuries, my niggles went away, and my race times are improving from 5K all the way to the marathon and beyond, and I discovered a joy of running I didn't even know existed. And like, then there's that whole part of, compassion, really like calming the nervous system, I think is another big one over there. And so, I know this was kind of all over the place answer, but this is the book that I wish I read earlier on in my running journey. But it's also a book that I will be rereading many times because it literally has all of these nuggets from 12 years of podcasting.
Yeah, that's exactly how I felt when I listened to it. Well, I didn't read it. I listened to it on Audible, and I've watched a lot of your episodes, and it felt to me like it was a distillation of the best parts of hundreds of hours of podcasts plus your experience, all consolidated into about 8 hours.
Yes.
So, if someone doesn't want to go through every podcast just to pick out that nugget that is really the thing that would be the sentence of the podcast, I would definitely recommend reading a book because it's got so much compressed into it.
There definitely is, and I think one element that we kind of took out of this as well, at the end of every YouTube video, I asked the question, what was one of your favorite lessons, takeaways, or quotes from this conversation? And so I was literally just asking the YouTube community. And over time, we've gotten, like, the YouTube channel has more than 12 million views right now. And there were more than 20,000 comments to go through for those chapters that we selected. But from about 60 different podcast guests that I featured in there, we literally had the YouTube community say, these were my favorite lessons, these were my favorite takeaways. Because what resonates with me sometimes might resonate different with another person. And so if I actually just looked at what are the most upvoted comments on YouTube per video and like kind of go through it that way, so it really became like, yes, it was written by me, there's a lot of different guests featured in there, but then also the whole element from the community of this was that specific lesson that resonated with me.
Sounds a little bit like a community project as well.
100%, it really was.
Yep. Yeah. Did you have a specific runner avatar in mind, or a few different runner avatars in mind when you actually put that book together?
Yes, for me the avatar was really like the recreational runner looking to improve, and that goes anywhere from an athlete. It can be beneficial for athletes in 20s, 30s, all the way to 50s, 60s, 70s and beyond. Even when I look at our running coaching program, we literally have athletes in their 20s in there, and we have athletes 80 plus in there. And so I think the main thing that I just come across, many athletes get injured, many athletes get overtrained, burned out, they hit a plateau, or they don't know how to train and why. So I want to zoom out on that and provide basic fundamentals. There's some basic training schedules. If you have X amount of time available to train, this is how I would go about it. And from there on, yes, it is very much injury prevention focused. It's not only focused on the running component. There's like the nutritional element, there's the mindset element, the stress management element. So all of these different parts that come into play to make you overall a better runner. But once your running is in the right place, you will be surprised how it impacts other areas of your life as well. And so that's what I've previously seen with quite a few people that were out of shape or overweight or even suicidal, that they would start with very gentle, kind training, even like a few minutes a day of walking, with adding in some jogging of 30 seconds. And if over time you start doing that more and you get those small wins, you will be surprised how all of a sudden you just feel better. And then all of a sudden you start to eat better, sleep better. And I love seeing those kind of things, that people's lives can completely turn around in like a 6-month, 12-month, 2-year period, purely by starting out with that gradual walking, really.
I've heard you talk about during the editing process of your book, you had to take out a lot of content. Now, looking back, was there something you wish remained in the book, or was there a piece of content that you would still like to share that didn't make it into the final cut of the book?
So the editing process is interesting. So when you go through something like that, you initially put together all of the different ideas on paper and you create an outline for it and you start writing chapters, and some resonate and come out the way you wanted it and some don't. I wrote every single chapter as a standalone chapter. I don't have the bandwidth mentally anymore to read a book from page 1 to page 400. However, I do have the bandwidth to open a chapter at night and be like, hey, this chapter about movement like techniques for 2 or 3 pages that resonates with me today, or this chapter about breathing patterns or running form or strength training, this resonates with me tonight. And so you can either pick out your favorite athlete or your favorite topic. When going through the editing process, I really decided to use the lens of what is it an absolute yes of keeping that in. And that was very challenging because there were 700 plus pages in there. However, at some point there was just some repetition in the chapters, and that's where I felt like if it was a repetition, let's just move it over to the bonus section. There's a few different things about heart rate variability that I ended up not putting into the book that I think are still very powerful. It was just there was already so much information in the book, and it talked more about heart rate training instead of heart rate variability. But I think to anyone listening, heart rate variability can very well indicate your stress levels in your body. And there's a variety of different tools available. For example, if I have an Aura ring over here and you can measure in the morning, it's actually a Finnish company, I believe. You can actually wear it and overnight actually see like, okay, this is my heart rate variability. But even there's some iPhone apps available for like a few dollars where you can literally just put your finger on the camera light and it starts measuring like what is your heart rate variability. And what you will start noticing is what is my baseline and when is it off, meaning typically you would like to have a higher heart rate variability, but if your heart rate variability drops quite a bit, at that point you might indicate of like, hey, I'm not recovered from that hard workout yet, or maybe I haven't slept that well. And so taking your day-to-day runs, we were talking about flexibility and training earlier, you can use heart rate variability as one of the inputs of like, hey, this is helpful to see where my stress levels are at. I think resting heart rate is a good one, but I think heart rate variability is a secondary good one as well. So I didn't leave that in the book. It moved to the bonus section, but still I think it's an important part.
You mentioned earlier that you only have the bandwidth these days to kind of go through one chapter at a time. And, you know, a lot of people are also very busy. A lot of times people buy a book and they never finish it. So, you know, if someone reads only one chapter of Running Breakthroughs and applies it consistently, which chapter do you think would actually really change their running the most?
I think when we go to the end, I actually wrote a conclusion in there. And so for me, like going through some of the conclusion, what it all means, there it kind of all comes together, meaning it basically summarizes the entire book. And like if you want, I can even read a few of the sections over here from the beginning if that would be helpful in any sort of way, because I do truly think that there's something there that will apply. Like there's let me actually show over here like the conclusion, advice to younger self. So one of the questions I'd love to ask my guest on the Extra Milest Show is, if you could go back in time, what advice would you give your younger self starting out in running or on that journey to better health? Now it's my turn to answer this question. We begin with everything, every training, every race completed, every challenge we overcame. This is our source material. Running is merely physical movement. It isn't merely physical movement, it is a creative act. With each run, you're composing a narrative about who you are becoming. Your body is your instrument, your mind the composer. Awareness is your superpower. The difference between an average runner and an extraordinary one isn't merely talent, it is awareness. Notice how you really felt, how your feet strike the ground. Notice your controlled breathing. Observe the subtle sensations that signal when to push and when to ease back. This expanded awareness isn't something you force, it is something you allow to happen. A presence with what is happening in the internal now of your run. Take moments throughout your day to tune into yourself. Breathwork, meditation, and journaling are powerful tools for this. And so then we kind of go through what are some of these tiny changes you can make for remarkable results. What can you do to overcome some of these plateaus? And so I think some of the things we have touched on about over here already, but doing the work, but staying flexible and building the right support system. I think those are all very key elements. And then here's one part I just want to mention. Remember why you started. At its core, running isn't about achieving goals or impressing others. It is about discovering who you are, the part of you that creates not because you have to, but because you get to. Each run is an act of self-expression, an opportunity to commune with something larger than yourself. Ultimately, breakthroughs happen when you grasp the big picture and recognize how holistic training principles apply not just to running, but to every aspect of your life. The universe is only as large as our perception of it. When we cultivate our awareness through running, we expand the universe. The path of the runner, like the path of the artist, is one of continuous evolution. There's no arrival, only the ongoing practice of being fully present with each step, each breath, and each moment. So I think that is just one chapter that I think it applies to many different athletes when we take that zoomed out look, instead of looking just at this is the next race I'm going to do and this is the goal time, and if I finish that time it's good, and if I miss that time it's bad. I think it's the entire journey you take yourself on.
I love the very mindful approach that you take to running. You've mentioned that in your coaching program you've got athletes from their 20s all the way until the 80s, and I think a lot of people running these days are people that have come to the sport a bit later in life, be it in the 40s, 50s and 60s. I'm one of those that only came into it when I was 44, and we might quietly worry that we've missed a window. And based on everything that you've seen, what would you say to someone who's starting out in midlife, who wants to improve their running performance but also stay healthy long term? What would be your strategy for that?
I would say go slower than you think, especially in those early stages. Like, build that engine first, strengthen your body, but really let your consistency beat your intensity. Meaning, just show up. That means, for many athletes, that means taking walk breaks and going slower initially. But with consistency, that pace will start improving. So you don't have to force it. But for many athletes, this does mean going quite a bit slower than they think.
What advantages do you think late starting midlife runners actually have over the younger runners?
They probably respect recovery more because they realize that they can't get away with what they used to when they were 20. They have a bit more respect to themselves. They listen more. Meaning they realize that forcing something harder doesn't always get better results, really. And I think they often train for the joy and the health aspect, and the validation part is not that important anymore. So I think those few things are definitely some advantages from late start runners.
And what do you think runners should be doing less next year in 2026, even if it feels productive? And what do you think they should be doing more of?
I feel one big thing that might seem kind of left field over here, I think a lot of people have phone addiction issues. And I think digital behavior, whether that is time spent on a computer screen, on an iPad, on a computer, or on a phone, I think it's only going to amplify, and more people are so zoned in. Whenever I travel and I look around me, so many people are detached from themselves because they're just glued to a screen. I think, yes, if you have some more self-awareness and be able to spend less time doom scrolling and some more time actually being very aware of some of your digital behavior, I think digital minimalism, digital detox, taking some dedicated hours off your phone, it seems that it was only 5-10 years ago where that was very normal to do, and right now it almost seems like it's this 24/7 connected society. And so be aware of just awareness in general, even of your digital behavior, I think will eventually lower your stress levels and will improve your running indirectly. So I would yes, you can run more, you can focus on training volume, you can focus on building. I think there's a lot of content around that already, but I think truly digital behavior is a big one. And that can be as simple as, to anyone listening here, like what are some more practical takeaways that could mean when you wake up? Make it clear to yourself the first 30 minutes you're not going to look on your phone. Just check in with self, just that part. And same in the evening. Instead of starting a morning routine, there's quite a few people that are now starting to look into evening routines. So set an alarm. If you want to be in bed by 10 o'clock, set an alarm at 9. And that 9 o'clock alarm might mean like, all right, let's start winding down. Let's turn off the computer screens. Let's put away the phone. Let's brush our teeth, read a book, and actually calmly fall asleep, versus the moment you lay in bed, you turn off your phone, have the phone next to your bed. So I think it's these small things that will bring a sense of calm and stress reduction to you that will overall make you a healthier athlete.
I've started doing that as well. I don't sleep with my phone beside me in the bedroom. I leave it outside.
Yeah.
And depending on the time, I would meditate for a while, and then I would read the Bible for a short while. Yeah, then I go through my morning stuff, and then I get into my phone.
Yeah, and I think for everyone, whatever works for you in that sense, but as long as it's not wake up and automatically you're into response mode because the messages are going to start coming in and whatnot. And I think you have a very grounding, calming morning routine there, and just do what works well for you indeed.
Your framework of becoming a stronger, healthier, and happier runner. When life stress increases, whether it's work, family, poor sleep, aging parents, which of these three do you think should take priority and why?
How about instead of Asian parents, Asian wife?
No, sorry. I said aging parents.
Oh, aging. I thought you said Asian. I was like,
no. Sorry. Aging. Because yeah.
Sorry. I think the healthier part is one of the key important ones, meaning the other elements will fall into place, but if your health is not in the right place, that is what impacts everything, right? I think the moment we get injured, the moment we get ill, the moment our back goes out or whatever, we realize how much we use that and we don't appreciate it. But once it actually happens, it's like, oh, I so wish that this would be better. And so I think prioritizing health, making that a top priority, and be more concrete with that, it would be, let's prioritize sleep. Sleep is the most underutilized tool for athletes that they can easily use. And that really means, I would say, 7 to 8 hours at least for athletes. And when you start training more, for quite a few endurance athletes, that would mean 9 hours a day to properly recover from. And making that a top priority, and I've noticed numerous times in our running coaching program that athletes were hitting a plateau and they were not progressing at all. They were doing low intensity training for 3-4 months and they could not become faster at the same heart rate. The moment I asked, how much sleep are you getting per night? And realizing that they were only sleeping 5-6 hours a night and challenging them to sleep more. Initially that became 6, 6.5, 7. And then once people start realizing like, hey, all of a sudden I'm becoming a minute faster per mile at the same heart rate in just a few weeks time. And I'm starting to feel more clear. I'm starting to feel more recovered. My legs have more pop. That 7 hours or 6.5, they want to start sleeping 8 hours. But I think by default, a lot of people are just not used to what that feels like. So to anyone listening over here, anything you can do to prioritize your sleep. And I know I'm very glad that like the Matthew Walkers of the world or the Brian Johnson, like they all talk about the importance of sleep. Andrew Huberman, Peter Attia. It is such a hot topic, but I think you can't underestimate how much of a difference it makes between allowing your body to sleep enough and just setting yourself up for long-term failure if you're not.
When you don't get enough sleep constantly, you feel like you have enough sleep until you actually get enough sleep. Then you realize that, oh man, you feel you can't function.
Absolutely, it's that brain fog stage that really comes through at that point. I think when you go camping, that's one of those things. Typically when you go camping, you go to bed earlier because it's like, you get the wood fire and then after a while you just go to your tent. there's quite a few people who sleep way more all of a sudden, even though you have to get used to an air mattress. There's that part where people might not sleep that well. But the whole part of, at that point, you just go to bed earlier and you wake up quite a bit later sometimes as well, and you realize like, hey, my body actually needed 8, 9, 10 hours of sleep.
Now, this episode will drop on the 1st of January 2026, so I want it to be on the first day of the new year, and you as the first guest of this podcast. And over the upcoming year, runners of all levels will aspire to achieve certain milestones in their running journey next year. For a new runner, it might just be to start running consistently. For others, it might be a new PR or racing a new distance. And you often ask your guests what advice they would give runners. Now, I want to throw the question back to you. What advice would you give someone who wants to become a better runner in 2026, regardless of their starting point? Or in your own words, what advice would you give someone who wants to become a stronger, healthier, and happier runner?
I would say simplify, don't overcomplicate things, but get to a point where you are able to train consistent. And I think one of the best ways to do that is to train most of your workouts at a fairly easy conversational pace. If you have a heart rate monitor, you can use a zone 2 calculator, you can use the 180-H formula, whatever formula you want to experiment with. But if you don't, just going out at a conversational pace would already be very helpful there. The other thing is, I think especially for athletes in their 40s, 50s and beyond, strength training twice a week is a very important component. Not only does it make you feel better, but you literally are starting to lose muscle mass. And so that's, I think, a big one. Sleep more. For most people, they can benefit from sleeping more. We've already talked about that. And I think journaling is a very powerful tool, not necessarily only journaling like, hey, this is the metrics of I ran this many miles per week and I did this or this, but on a consistent basis, just writing down, even if that's once a week. In our personal best program, every Sunday in the Facebook group, I asked the question, what was one thing that you learned this week? What was one takeaway? And what would you do differently? And I think if you do that self-check-in, and you can have a few different areas that you write down. For example, what was the quality of my sleep 1 to 10? What was the quality of my nutrition? What was the quality of my runs? You just have a few of these key areas, but do that on a consistent basis. Just have that honest check-in with self. It only takes a few minutes on a weekly basis. But I think that goes a long way in identifying patterns. This is going right. This is an area where things can improve. And then in particular, once you recognize that week after week, month after month, you will be surprised. These small changes can start to make a big impact over time.
I kind of have a feeling what you're going to say to my next question, but if a runner listening to this conversation right now remembers only one idea from this conversation or from reading your book, Running Breakthroughs, what do you hope it is? I can tell you what mine is, for what I took away, that one sentence from your book, but I'd like to hear what you hope for.
I would say your body and mind is often not the problem, but sometimes it really comes down to your approach in training, where trying harder, pushing more, putting in more training load is often not the problem. Sometimes actually doing less and being able to recover better and spreading out your workouts a bit more consistent throughout the week instead of having these killer workouts, over time, that allows you to train with joy, to train consistent. And so really, your body is not the problem, but I think your approach often can be.
When I listened to your book, the one sentence that really stood out to me was start where you are. Because, as you progress as a runner, you achieve certain milestones and you think that's your level. Mm-hmm. But it goes up and down, right? Based on life stress, illness, injuries, whatsoever. And when I was listening to your book, I just had a 6-week episode of mycoplasma, so I had this really bad cough, and a couple of weeks before that I ran a 3:05 marathon, a PR for me at 47 years old.
Nice.
And I thought,
well,
that's my level, right? In minutes per kilometer, my marathon pace is 4:20. But after coming back from the 6 weeks of illness, I was struggling with that, and I was listening to your book on the long run, and I thought, that really resonated with me. You know what? Forget about that. Forget about the 3:05 marathon. Let's start where I am right now. and let's build from there again, So I think it all comes back to what you talk about in your book and the approach that you take to running, that mindfulness, that be kind to yourself. So not hold a past standard of yourself, or not hold yourself to a past standard, and just be where you are right now in the moment.
The comparison really, one of the podcast guests, Martinez Evans, he brought it up, like comparison can be the thief of joy, where just only compare yourself to yourself and what are you doing today. And like, yes, you compare yourself to other people, I think you can set yourself up for disappointment, but just doing the best you can given your circumstances. You can do all the training right, and race day can happen, and a lot of unexpected things can still happen on race day, right? It's out of your control. So focus on the things you can control and just surrender and work through and keep your mind calm, and realize that we have these incredible bodies that allow us to run, and appreciate that. There's plenty of people who literally cannot run because their bodies or minds don't allow them. So actually have some appreciation for that, and just start small. Start going out there, get some of these small wins under your belt, and you will be surprised how far you can get. Many of you listening here can accomplish so much more than you think. Like, your glass ceiling is so much higher if you just be patient, think longer term, and keep showing up with consistency and joy and patience, really.
When you strip away everything, whether it's your training plans, metrics, expert opinions, what does running give you now in your 40s that didn't give you earlier in life?
Groundedness, meaning true connection with self. It recharges my body, it recharges my mind. And whether that is running a fast pace or a slow pace, pace is irrelevant. I just focus on time on feet. If I'm going out for a half an hour run or an hour run or a 2 hour run, I really don't look at pace anymore. As much as I have a heart rate monitor sometimes for specific high intensity workouts that I don't want to go over a certain heart rate and not overdo it so my recovery takes longer, I don't need a heart rate monitor anymore for my low intensity runs. I know what heart rate I'm at, and that's very much breath work. I've ran 20,000 miles over the last 12 years with low heart rate monitors where I'm just looking and I'm guessing, and like, it's pretty close right now. But I think being in tune with your body, being in tune with your mind, and just feeling grounded throughout it, I think is a big one.
It's interesting that you say pace doesn't matter, the fact that you're in the chorus office.
Then again, right, I think there's a lot of variables that come into play, even some of these watch features, where if I'm going on an adventure in the mountain, I love seeing any of the elevation, or I see other things that I still just think are valuable.
Yeah, but absolutely. I meant that as a joke.
Yeah, no, 100%. I just absolutely think that people sometimes get so glued to their watch and they get so obsessed by all the data, where I'm like, let go of some of that and just be in the moment, really.
Final question, Floris. What does endurance mean to you?
That's a good one. I think it is, I would say, your ability to keep showing up with care. Like, this really applies to a variety of different ways. Like, this can be in your running, this can be in your relationships, in your work, in your life. But keep showing up and truly caring. That's what I would say endurance is.
You're an inspiration, Floris. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. I really enjoyed this conversation.
If there were topics in this conversation that you'd like me to go deeper into with this guest, leave them in the comments. If there's enough interest, I'll invite the guest back onto the show and dedicate an episode to a deeper follow-up conversation. Thanks for watching all the way through, and I'll see you in the next episode.